because localization is being pushed to the end of the development period, and then they show up with 1 million words and 20 languages to translate. If the game is written in English, invest in a good proofreading. Never ever skip LQA. That's bad. That's a bad idea.
That's true.
What a lot of people forget is that translation is a form of creative writing, and it has a spectrum.
Yeah, so today we wanted to talk a bit about your personal experience as a localization director, a little bit about how things go in Daedalic and things like that. So I'll start with my first question to you. And can you tell us, when did you first got interested in games, and how did that happen? Like,
Actually, it happened when I was a kid. I think for a lot of people, it started like that. I actually have an older brother, and I ended up playing with his consoles way more than he did. Like, he had an Amiga and a PlayStation 1, and then we got a PC relatively late compared to all my friends. But when I entered this world of PC gaming, I never really went back, and then shared games with my friends, and yeah, that's when it happened. So in the end, my parents decided to buy me the games and not my brother.
do you remember the games you first got into?
Yeah, there was this really fun, like on the Amiga, there were all the older games that I never understood because they were all in English. But there was one game, I don't know if you know it, that was called Swap, which was just like a puzzle game, and that was my first favorite game ever. And it's so simple and just basically a bit, very, very, very simple. But
We'd call it casual.
yeah, let's call it casual.
Okay.
And like all the other games that come on PC, then it's
yeah.
Yeah.
When you were back in the days, were you thinking about your work in the future being connected to gaming industry, or like was it kind of random and you never expected this to happen?
Actually, I think I never figured I would work in this industry one day, because I think I simply never really knew which jobs there are apart from like the obvious ones like programming and art. And you never really know if there's a place for you if you're not interested in these kind of things or not skilled enough or something like that. So I think as a kid, I never really had like this big dream job that I aspired to have one day. So during my studies, actually, I focused on film. So I wanted to work in the film industry. And then somehow it happened to be the game industry instead.
You've said during your studies. What was your major back in college? Could you?
I majored in media and communications and English and American studies. Yeah.
And so, yeah, English and American studies probably helps you with localization right now. But what about media and communication? Do you find it helping, like your major in your current work?
Back then, well, it covered like a lot of aspects of media, but back in my days, I think games were never really a big part of my studies. I think it became more relevant after I left with a lot of younger professors and all that, but I never really learned anything about games. That's why I majorly focused on film. I still got to write my thesis on film and game topics, so that was cool. But I think in terms of if it helped my work right now, I think just in general, like learning to work and research in an academic field helps a lot with organizing tasks or meeting deadlines and so on. And yeah, of course, English studies obviously helps because I need it every day. Also makes me a linguist, and now I work with languages, so that helps a lot.
That turned out to work well.
Accidentally.
Yeah. Oh, I actually know English. How convenient.
Yes, that's
nice. Did you work in any game dev studios prior to Daedalic, or?
No, actually, Daedalic's my first job after university.
Okay. And how did you get there? Were you looking for jobs? randomly?
Well, yeah, kind of. I think back then I knew someone at Daedalic, and then I felt like safe to send in an application. Although it was for something completely different. It was for a marketing position because my studies kind of like included a couple of lectures on marketing. And yeah, I think up to that point, I only worked in television, like a completely different field.
Yeah.
So I never really had a game company on my radar for applications, but that's just how it happens. Like someone asked me to send in an application, and I just did.
If I'm not mistaken, you first started working in Daedalic as in customer support.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, what was the hardest thing when you have to work with tickets from players and constantly getting messages from, I assume.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's the hardest thing when you have to work with customers in that way?
Well, working with customers is a very specific field, you know, everybody's different. I think what challenged me the most is when it started to get very technical, like when I had the feeling that I'm offering IT support for people and their PCs instead of just helping with our games, and that's not really my domain. Um, Also for Daedalic, or that position that I was in, because it was a completely new position, we didn't have customer support before that, and they created this position like for me in the job interview. I was offered it. I think the workload rose exponentially with every game we released, and it was amazingly overwhelming. For the first years, I worked so much. It was so many tickets. It just the workload was immense because sometimes it's new tickets, sometimes it's known issues, and there's a lot of work involved. Of course, with newer issues and stuff that isn't documented well and things like that. So a couple of years after I worked like that, I was able to make some crucial changes in the customer support experience we now have at Daedalic, and then it all went back to normal, I think.
That means people hiring you were right when they did that.
I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Yeah, it's
I
great.
took it very seriously, actually, because I know not a lot of people take that seriously, and not a lot of companies don't do their own customer support. And I think we do, and it kind of resonates very well with our players because there is a person answering these emails and not someone completely like unrelated to the company. So I think a lot of people recognize that and like it.
Yeah, it helps you build connection, especially when you see it's not an auto reply and there's actually a person
Right.
that can try and at least try and understand what you're saying and why your game stopped working and everything was fine. And
it's also why it was so difficult, because I write every single reply like from scratch to make it more personal, and yeah, it shows.
Yeah, and the players feel like the company cares about their experience.
I hope.
When did you first take up the post of localization director? And can you tell us like what were your duties and what are they now?
That was in 2016, I think, when the localization manager before me like switched departments within the company, and then he just suggested I take up on it, and then I did. Basically, I organize and manage the entire localization work for all Daedalic projects, like including our in-house projects in our own development, as well as the publishing titles from external developers. I help with log kits and pipelines and schedules. I then manage the entire translation into the multiple languages. I am basically the main communicator between all involved parties, and after that, I manage local QA processes. I also help with voiceover work, like helping teams providing all information or gathering all information, and moving on to casting, scheduling, recordings. And I also, if I have the time, I also translate and proofread and do local QA for German texts.
Okay.
That's like a
Oh,
rough
it's like
overview.
I have a few hours. Let's translate a bit.
Yeah, yeah, why not? Because I like it. I like working with text, not just like now shuffling it around, but sometimes like doing the actual work going into the text. It's actually a lot of fun for me personally. I enjoy it.
Yeah, trying to find the best phrase and trying to convey. I understand that.
Yeah,
I rarely have to work with translation personally, but it is fun when,
yeah,
especially when you're struggling and then suddenly you're like, oh, I know, and it kind of works, and you're kind of happy and you're proud of yourself.
yep, that's true. It's like a satisfying work
Yeah,
sometimes,
it's
also
like.
creative, so it's a
So
nice challenge.
what's the favorite part in your all of your duties? What would you name the most fun, the most enjoyable part of your workflow?
Well, apart from what I just mentioned, like working with text, which I really enjoy, I think for my particular position and the position that I'm in, I really enjoy working with so many different teams.
Yeah.
Because every game is different, every team works differently. Um, and usually in development, you work on one game for months or years, more likely. And I get to work on a lot of different games, mostly at the same time, which is of course absolutely overwhelming, but it's also a challenge I enjoy. So yeah, that's what I like most about it.
The fact that you have to juggle different games at the same time.
Yeah, when you say it like that, it does sound weird.
I'm just trying to make it clear, like the thing you enjoy the most is being stressed out and having.
Yeah, now that you mention it, I might have a problem. No, it's
I,
like everything is different. It's not, I don't get bored.
oh,
So
that is a positive, yeah. And also, I'm sure people in the gaming industry they're happy with those who enjoy being overwhelmed with work.
yeah, I think so.
Can you tell us about your localization department? Like, at what stage? I know that different companies do it differently. At what stage does localization department gets? When do you get involved in the process of development? Like, is it pre-alpha, or do you wait for the game to be more or less ready, and then you're like, okay, time to translate?
Yeah, ideally, we get involved as early as possible, like when we sign a game or when we
Yeah,
start working on it, so that we're at the table right from the beginning. Um, yeah, in reality, it's not like that. So
yeah. More
localization,
interested in reality than.
yeah, the reality is like the complete opposite. We get involved extremely late, mostly because localization is being pushed to the end of the development period, and then they show up with a million words and 20 languages to translate. Like that's of course an
Yeah.
exaggeration, but um,
Sometimes
yeah,
it's not.
yeah, sometimes it's not.
Do you think that is a common problem in different companies? Do you think there is a way to maybe persuade the decision makers to? Because I've seen other companies when people are like, yeah, ideally would want to start working on localization right after the design document is ready to kind of understand and help the developers and narrative directors build the texts the
Yeah.
perfect way for localization, and it never happens. Is there a way to maybe how can we tell those people, guys, we need to start working on localization earlier?
Well, if you find a way, please let me know. I I started since we're working so much with external partners that I just can't barge in and say, "Are you working on localization already?" I like wrote a document with all like errors to avoid and everything they need to like check beforehand before we start. Of course, I can never check if they actually take everything into account, but I just have to like put pressure on it because a lot of people underestimate localization, and it's my job to like tell them it's important. You have to take care of it early, and when it's when it's like a project in our own development, it's easier for me. I can go there, I can talk to the people and say like,
Yeah.
let's talk about it early. Let's talk about it now. We have a lot of experience. uh, like get me on the table. But Yeah, I think it's always difficult because there are so many priorities, and localization never seems to be like one of it. I don't know why that is.
Yeah, you're kind of like, let's talk about localization, and people are like, the gameplay loop is not ready yet. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
There is nothing to localize. But
Yep.
actually, there are things to consider about localization even before your texts are ready. So
Yeah,
th-
that's true. Like I can't help with a lot of technical stuff. Of course, they have to figure that out themselves. But as soon as they need help, also the writers, if they need help on how to set up different structures, like I'm there. I think every localization expert is there to help. So you just have to ask.
yeah, guys, you hear that? If you have a problem, just come to Maria, please.
Nope, don't.
So
I've learned the hard way that I cannot solve every problem in the world.
you've mentioned working with external development companies. Is there any way, like you mentioned, you give advice to them and you can't always like follow through if they're actually doing that the right way, but is there any set of advice for development companies to prepare their game for localization? Even, I mean, any company that's trying to localize their project, is there a way to have a checklist of, okay, we've done this, this, and this, the game is ready to be localized?
I think there are a lot of things that need to be considered. Like, for example, it seems to be an easy thing, but the base language needs to be perfect. If the
Yeah.
game is written in English, invest in a good proofreading because that's the language that every other languages will use as a base. Um, Never ever underestimate the time and work localization takes. Never underestimate it, but also don't be afraid of it. So don't push it back too far. Get involved in it now. Plan a good lock kit because that's the base for everything. If there are mistakes in there, they're going to be there for a long while. Like have that ready at the beginning when you start working on the text. Like know what you're gonna want to end up with. Stuff like fonts, like test your
Yeah.
fonts before you even start localizing. Do it with dummy texts. If you know you're going to include Asian languages, include dummy texts and test the fonts. It's pretty easy without an actual translation, but just like do extra test runs before. And I think super important is for the programmers to code with localization in mind. Like remember there's gonna be a localization one day, and when you have text and text boxes that don't scale, it's gonna be a problem because you always see English in those boxes, but there are longer languages like German, and there are like languages with different line break rules like the Asian languages. You have to like once you start coding, you have to understand it has to be adaptable for a lot of different languages and not just for English, not just for the one thing you can see right now. After that, never ever skip LQA. That's bad. That's a bad idea.
That's true. That's
There's
true.
always going to be mistakes. Never think that's not important or anything. Um, Never change localization once it's in progress. Never change texts. It's a
That
given.
I think that's close to impossible, though.
I know. I still try. Never hard code text into your game. We've done that. We've had a lot of like uh, painted texts in our games. Like in our very first games, there are a pain to localize. Never have like text in game that cannot be localized because it's going to be a problem, especially with Chinese, because you cannot have any English words in your game. And if there's like a newspaper article that you cannot translate, well, that's too bad. It's really, really bad.
So yeah, there are things you need to consider because I've seen a lot, especially the smaller teams that are just starting to work with
Yeah.
localization. They're kind of overwhelmed with all the
Yeah.
things that occur.
Oh, there's also one good tip that a lot of people might not know, and that's have one dedicated localization person in your team, like from the technical side, because it's often a topic that gets thrown around a lot and nobody feels responsible for integrating text or doing all these things that I just mentioned, and having one person that also the localization manager can address, and that's his responsibility to make sure localization is good on the technical end, that helps a lot, because I've seen it that some teams are just like, no, I'm not responsible for this, he do that, blah 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 blah. It's not going to work out. It has to be a responsibility that has to go to someone.
Yeah. Can you tell me how Daedalic chooses languages for localization? Like, do you conduct research for every other project? Like, this game might work on this and this markets, or do you have a set of languages like eFigs plus Asian, and that's it?
Yeah, we do have this set of languages, but deciding on languages for a new project is mostly an executive decision by my CEO, because he simply knows best which games are popular in which countries, and he makes his decision basically. Well, we have that set of languages that we try to apply to as many games as we can. But it's like 13 languages. So when there's a very high word count, we of course have to cut some of those. I remember we did that for our game, The Pillars of the Earth, because it's based on Ken Follett's book. We tried to find out in which countries the book was a success or the movie was a success, and the game has a lot of words. So we tried to especially focus on that group of countries that actually enjoyed like the books and the topics and that.
Well, we know examples when games actually made books more popular. I mean, of course, I'm thinking about The Witcher, but I'm sure there are other examples.
No, it's just The Witch.
It's just The Witcher. But the book really got more popular after the games came out.
And
I think
then,
I've only read the book after the first game. I was like, wow, this exists.
Yeah, I think a lot of people thought that.
I know that some companies, before choosing languages, what they do is they release the game in English in different markets, and then they see where the game gets more and more popular, and then they add those languages. Do you think that's a valid strategy?
I think it is. I think every strategy is pretty valid, because in the end, it's a gambling game. You cannot predict the future, and I think it might help certain companies to just release games in English and then just like observe what the players say. Like, will there be demands from the community? There will always be demands from the community for certain languages. So maybe trying to figure out which languages are like where the demand is highest. It could also mean that you like lose a lot of players right at the beginning, because as we know, once you launch a game, the sales are the most important thing, and a lot of people won't buy games that are not localized into their languages. They won't never ever give it a second chance, because there's so many games out there. Why would they even? So having a game localized into many languages could mean the survival of a game, but also it's like predicting the future. So localization is super expensive. It costs so much money, which is often not fully understood. And for Daedalic, we invest a lot into in localization. We have this, as I said, 13 language set. We hardly ever cut back, and we think it's an investment. And I hope it's something the player base is always very, very grateful for, because that's something that we always do. But yeah, as I said, I think every strategy is valid. Sometimes I see very popular games being released only in English, and I think, wow, that's a decision right there.
Yeah. That's bold.
That's bold, but maybe it helped them save money and then concentrate on what they actually need to localize, because it's as I said, gambling situation right there.
Yeah, I think it's a lot easier for games working in agile with like games as a service, because you can always add it later. But for traditional games, for games that Daedalic focuses on mostly, it's you need to be ready on the day of release.
Yeah.
Talking about Daedalic's games, Daedalic has always been releasing games with a lot of focus on narrative.
Mhm.
A lot of games have, like, I mean, of course, I'm thinking about Deponia, but there are others as well.
Yeah.
What's the hardest part when localizing a game with strong narrative?
I think it's for translators, it's finding the right tone. Like if you have a big story, for example, again, The Pillars of the Earth, which of course we have to use translators who are familiar with the work, with the tone, with the characters. I think it needs translators who are good writers, who know what they're doing in their specific language. And for Daedalic, it's not only that they're story driven, but we have very quirky humor, and finding people who can work with that, not only tell a good story in their language, but also like transfer that humor into their language, is a challenge. And I I don't think everybody's up for it, because of course translators can also focus on specific genres, and most freelance translators that we work with are super experienced in story-driven games. So that's important to have someone to work with. Um, for us, also specifically, the Deponia series, for example, was written in German first.
Yeah.
So having a good English version is an absolute challenge. You have to find someone who can understand that text and do a good translation of it, because of course everybody else will use it as a base. Um, yeah, that was a big challenge.
I think I've played it in English, and I never even considered that it was written in German. So,
Yeah, a
of course,
completely different game.
I'm not a native speaker though, so it's hard to tell.
Yeah, that's true.
You've mentioned working with translators, so this is an old question, but what's your opinion on working with freelancers, having your in-house department of translators, or working with vendors? Like, what's the best choice for a company like Daedalic?
As far as in-house department goes, it's just me. um,
So
it's me
German
and
only.
yeah, and I have one other colleague most of the time, but he's an German English translator, but he's also an author, narrative designer, and works on several games at the same time. And yeah, we usually depend on freelance translators that we've worked with for long years and have a well-established relationship with. Um, and yeah, I really enjoy working with them, actually. There are people who get every single one of our games. Sometimes, of course, they can't, because we have a lot of games, we have a lot of publishing titles at the same time. Like last year, we released a lot of early access titles, which of course require constant attention, like every 2 months, every other week. In times like these, we sometimes use agencies that are able to like pull off big workloads in a lot of target languages at the same time. But that's basically the emergency situation.
So you use a freelance team of translators you trust, and then there is a safety net of
Right.
vendors.
That's
Okay,
right.
you've mentioned the feedback from players.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm sure you know, and we've seen it with different games. Every time there is a localization, even if it's close to perfect, of course, it never gets as good as the source text. Rarely it does. There are always criticism from
Mm-hmm.
players. How
Yeah.
do you? Is there any set of criteria? How do you tell which criticisms are valid, and what are just people talking about their
Being
subjective
people.
ideas? Yeah.
Um, that's actually a good question, because I think it's a very fine line sometimes. In general, I take feedback seriously, and I often share it with my translators and ask them if they think it's valid, because in the end it's their call and I trust their judgment, and I don't speak every language. How should I know if that's a valid feedback or not? Um, I think what a lot of people forget is that translation is a form of creative writing, and it has a spectrum. So
Yeah.
not everyone is a writer, an author in their own mother tongue. It's a craft like other crafts. And so a lot of player feedback often comes down to personal like taste. That's of course I think most of the time it's just like that. I would have done it differently, so I hate this, and here's my suggestion. Of course, every translator has the right to say, "Nah, I won't implement that. I will just ignore it. Sorry, it's my name in the credits. It's my
Yeah.
work. This is not how I work." Um, but sometimes there are things that my translators like incorporate, like if there's a typo, something that is technically wrong, like a wrong text at the wrong place in the game, which is great if players spot that. That is amazing because it just happens. And yeah, as I said, we take it seriously. There are a lot of things that we change after that,
Yeah.
after some feedback, but I'd say we don't bend over backwards because there are just too many opinions out there and you just cannot heed everyone.
Yeah.
So when I read negative reviews like just saying poor translation, what should I do with that? Like I have to find out what exactly is the problem. Is there something wrong or is it just your opinion? And sometimes you just get into dialogue with players and then find out. But I really, really appreciate um, like detailed feedback. Like if there's someone who says that is wrong, that is just not good. It sounds like machine translation. All these things that you hear, which these are things that I can discuss with my translators, and I always do.
Yeah. So to sum it up, you need LQA and you need to trust your
Definitely.
translators.
Definitely. But still, a lot of things can go wrong. Even if you have good translators, even if you have like 3, 4 rounds of LQA, there's always things that can go wrong in the end. It's a human error.
Yeah, sure.
Like, you also have to trust the development team to implement the changes and also to fix the bugs that were reported, because that's also something that you cannot do yourself. There has to
Yeah.
be some kind of trust there as well.
Did it happen to you that you reported localization issues and then like 3 months later
Yeah.
you come back and
Like
and the players they
it
don't know
never
that, right?
ended up. No, they
Yeah,
don't.
the players think, oh, I've reported that and Maria has replied to me and that means the issue is gonna disappear tomorrow.
Right.
Yeah, guys, it takes time. It is a process.
Yeah, that's true.
I have one more question about it's generally not about the Daedalic, but generally about
Hmm?
niche games. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, Daedalic is kind of switching to different genres, but it used to
Hmm.
work a lot with quests. So, do you think games, companies that work with such niche genres, among that are popular among smaller subset of players, should they have generally, of course, I understand it's general, but should they add as many languages as possible because the player base is potentially very small, or since the player base is small, we need to save money and just release it in 2 or 3 languages and see what's
Yeah.
going on?
That is, it's a tricky question because in the end, it it comes down to budget. It's your own decision if you can afford it,
Yeah,
if you want to afford it, if you can. Um, I think since we know what it's like to release niche games and they don't get a lot of attention, and yeah, maybe you have 2, 3 players who are very grateful that you offered their language, but it's not what gets you the money back. Um, I think I I've seen it before and we've also done it before, but I think for smaller companies and niche games that are still very beloved, I think fan translations are a great way to actually save money
yeah,
and also like bond with the community or have a great connection, because it can lead to a lot of good things. So you just, you ask beforehand, ask the community if anyone's interested in working in games, because a lot of people are interested in doing that, and for a smaller coin or for maybe for free. And you don't have to worry about the cost. You don't have to worry about it being like top quality, because you can still say it's a community effort. It was built by you guys, and I've seen it do a lot of good things, especially for like early access games or no, smaller teams that just say, sorry, we cannot offer, like being open about it beforehand, like saying we cannot afford localization. It's very expensive. It's also a lot of work, which you might not know. So is anyone up to helping us? Maybe.
Yeah.
And that's a great way to save money, but be on the safe side to have a lot of languages still. And a lot of people actually then realize what localization is and appreciate it a bit more.
True. That is actually a good solution for smaller teams.
Mm.
I've seen, since we're located in Russia, I've seen there are a few fan-based, like volunteer teams that localize games into Russian,
Yeah,
and the quality is sometimes surprisingly good.
yeah, that's true.
The downside is that they often take years to make
Yeah.
the translation, but I mean, if what you're looking for is to save money and just get good quality localization, get into player base is sometimes a valid
Yeah.
option.
I absolutely agree.
Um, can you tell us a little bit about your workday? How do you organize it? Like, do you use any time management tools or
No.
techniques?
I, I have nothing to share because I don't know, any technique is absolutely useless in my workday because it just comes as it comes. Like you have to take care of everything that is um like time critical because of time
Yeah.
zones in like before lunch and everything everything else after lunch. um I mostly just, even if I try to plan time, like I have multiple jobs, like I still
Yeah.
have the customer support side, I still have the localization side, obviously, which is my most concern. I In the end, I end up like taking care of the things that are most pressing and then spend the rest of the time doing the things I have to do. That's
Okay.
basically
Yeah.
it.
You're done with everything that must have been done yesterday, and now you can get back to your regular tasks.
Yeah, pretty
So,
much.
so what's your typical workday look like? You come into office and people are like throwing bunches of
Stuff at
text
me.
at you.
Yeah. So when there's no pandemic going on,
Yeah.
I, I commute to work, go into the office, like at 9:30, and it's pretty much a boring office job. Basically, I check my mails, I check my calendar, I check all
So you do
communication
use a
channels.
calendar.
I do use a calendar. Well, basically, I also do this.
So
Actually, a
the
non-digital calendar. Um, yes. I also like check all channels like Skype, Discord, everything that has accumulated. And yeah, and then I just reply to emails, have meetings that could easily also be emails. And yeah, as I said, just a boring office job. Take care of everything that needs to be done before lunch for the Asian countries,
yeah.
and then have lunch in a very boring street. And then it's basically the same thing in the afternoon. And then I try to get home and not continue working from there.
And it almost never happens. Okay, let's switch to the rapid fire round. I'll
Oh
just
my
ask a
gosh.
question. If you don't want to reply in long sentences, you can just give me a short answer or just not answer at all. How do you spend your free time?
Games, obviously. Um, Workout, I don't like sports. Wasting time on social media. Spending time with boyfriend, friends. Not at the moment, of course. Not. I can't see my
Yeah,
friends. Usually, I do that.
you've mentioned games. What are you playing right now?
Right now, I'm playing Recore and Life is Strange 2.
I've never played the second one, but how is it in comparison to the first?
I'm still in the middle of the first episode. It's a different story, but I really like it.
Okay, maybe
It's sad, of course. It's breaking your heart all the time. But that's kind of the DNA of these games.
I'll consider buying it. Then I was kind of, I liked the first one, and then I was like, should I buy the second one? I don't know.
Yeah,
The characters are different. I kind of don't want to see new characters.
yeah, I agree, but they are very lovable. So
Okay. Name your top 3 favorite books.
my top 3 favorite books are Happiness by Will Ferguson, Good Omens by Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman, and The Last Unicorn by Peter Beagle.
Okay. Haven't read any of that, so
You
I'll
should.
I'll try. Top 3 movies.
The Grand Budapest Hotel, Mad
Okay.
Max Fury Road, and Almost Famous. 3
Almost
very
Famous.
different movies.
What games or a game, in your opinion, had the best German localization?
I don't play games in German.
Oh no.
So I can only say which Daedalic game has the best German localization, and that
Okay,
would
which
be
one?
The Pillars of the Earth, or Die Säulen der Erde, which is the German title.
Okay. So if you're speaking German, if you're a native speaker or you're learning German, go and play Pillars of the Earth in German.
Yeah. Well, I have to say all our games have good German localization.
Yeah, and sometimes they're
Excellent.
even written in German.
That's right. What better way to learn German?
Yeah. I think playing games is a very good way to learn a language.
Absolutely. Everything with subtitles is great.
Yeah.
Like watching movie with subtitles, playing games with subtitles.
But games also involve you, so you kind of feel more attached. I don't know.
That's true.
Final question. You've played Deponia, right?
Yeah, I did.
Deponia or Elysium?
Oh, that's easy, Elysium.
Come on, there is no soul there.
Yeah, well, it's clean. Yeah.
Okay. I did not expect that answer.
I like clean water. I think it's a big privilege, so I like it.
That is. Well, thank you for this. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.